Hey gang, it's James coming on real quick. I've got a jacket on because I was just outside and I forgot to take it off when I came in, so I know that's kind of weird. I'm not freezing to death in my Freightliner. I wanted to come on real quick because I am stopped. I'm waiting for another driver to come and swap trailers with me, so I've got a few minutes. I wanted to talk about the idea of Christmas being pagan. This is something where my understanding has shifted over the years. And let me explain. So, I'm thinking about this right now in the moment because of a discussion I had with a friend yesterday. He sent me a link to a discussion that was going on, and basically a Messianic Torah type ministry is what I gathered. That's basically talking about how Christmas is not pagan. And we were talking about how this is a trend we're seeing in this Messianic Torah space, where more and more people are going back to keeping Christmas, and you've got teachers online saying, oh, there's nothing wrong with Christmas, it's not pagan. And so you've got Torah keepers who are going back to keeping Christmas. And so I wanted to kind of address that. Now, historically, if you were to search my Facebook, assuming that the search feature works, it doesn't work for Donald Trump on my page, but anyway, assuming that you can go back far enough and find it, you can find posts, and if you know me personally, you've heard me say this over the years, unequivocally, I was stating that Christmas is pagan. Okay? And in my earlier career as a volunteer Facebook preacher, I was quite forceful about that. As time has progressed, my language has softened some, and I still am of the mind that believers should not be keeping Christmas at all. I don't, it's not scriptural. There's nothing in the Bible that says to keep Christmas. Yes, the Messiah was born, but he wasn't born on December 25th. We can know that with certainty. And so, but I'm going to address the whole pagan element around it. And my position, if you understand what pagan means, when you look for that word pagan or heathen, depending on your translation, you will find that it goes back into Hebrew typically to the word goy or goyim. And we know at the time of the Roman period under Second Temple Judaism, pagan, heathen, that was a term generally used for people like out in the countryside. You know, your common folk out, you know, they were uncivilized. You know, they were out there in the woods, out there in the country, you know. They weren't civilized city dwellers worshiping the pantheon or even worshiping the Christian God or whatever, right? So there's nuance in interpretation of what that means depending on if you're talking about in the Old Testament Hebrew context or in the New Testament Greco-Roman context. But either way, if you like broaden it out and look, Jeremiah 10, learn not the way of the heathen, okay? When we look at the broad interpretation of that, you have Israel, and Romans 11 tells you who that is. You have Israel. These are people who are actively engaged in the worship of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Everybody else that's not Israel, scripturally speaking, is a heathen or a pagan. Now, in modern times, if I say heathen, we tend to think of Neanderthals, barbarians, you know, they're eating raw meat and all this kind of stuff. Like, pagan tends to have more of a, oh, they're doing witchcraft, or maybe they're worshiping Odin, you know, the Norse Viking mythology or whatever, right? So there's nuanced interpretations, but in our scriptures, they basically mean the same thing. Non-Israel. Okay? That's why when you look at the actual Hebrew, you'll see nations. You won't see pagan or heathen. You won't see that connotation. You'll see nations, non-Israel. Okay? So is Christmas pagan? I'm going to say yes and no. Here's why. We know for a fact that Christmas is heavily steeped in pagan customs and tradition. You can't argue it. Pat Robertson, I've shared the video. I got to post it again this year. It's a Christmas tradition. On the 700 Club, point blank said, yeah, it's pagan. Every bit of it's pagan, but we do it for Christ. Now think about that. Think about that. In our modern understanding, the way we use the word pagan, Paganism is worshiping other gods. So we're taking something that we know is 100% pagan and using that to worship God. Like, even Pat Robertson called it out. But he's going to go ahead and do it anyway. Why? Tradition. So Christmas is full of paganism. The Yule log, the mistletoe, the time of year, December 25th. I mean, you could just go right down the list. Santa Claus, you can make arguments that there's pagan origins there. You can connect him back to Odin. There's different research, different scholars come to different conclusions on that. Either way, not scriptural. There's nothing in our scriptures that associates anything with Christmas with the worship of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So yes, Christmas is steeped in pagan tradition and customs. Is it pagan? This is where the nuance comes in. This is where we have to kind of allow our brains to think freely in this middle space between the two poles, between the two ends of the pendulum. I'm going to say that inherently, just on a technical definition, Christmas is not pagan. And the only reason I'm saying that is because of Christmas as it's celebrated today did not originate from outside of the camp. It's the Hindi religion, the Hindus. They didn't make Christmas. The Romans didn't make Christmas. Now they had their own Saturnalia, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, they had that. Christmas, as its own unique entity, was created by Christians. And if we make the assumption that Christians, via Romans 11, are Israel, then the holiday Christmas, I cannot say emphatically 100%, is pagan. Now, this is where the nuance comes in. I literally just said everything about it is pagan. I literally just said everything about it is pagan. But here's where it comes in. We know that there's an element of syncretism, right? We know that the early church, going back to the early Catholic days and a little bit before that, was bringing in these pagan elements into the church, into the Romans 11 Israel. They were adopting these pagan customs, and they had enough of that pagan custom in there to when they started Christmas as a uniquely Christian holiday, it was already done. It was already lost. There was no redeeming it from the beginning. It was already steeped in paganism. So while we can't technically say it's pagan, it's pagan. So I know some people will roll eyes at that distinction, but I think it's important to make. Because you've got people out there that are saying, looking at the origins of it, going back to the early Christian era, and because of that, they're saying it's not pagan, because it wasn't created by pagans, it was created by the church. Yeah, that's true. You know what else was created by the church? This syncretistic worship of Baal and Yahweh. The golden calf, what are they doing? They're making a golden calf, and they're saying, this is Yahweh your God, who brought you up out of Egypt. Let's worship. No. They took pagan elements and they did something unique. The golden calf. No one in history had ever used a golden calf to worship Yahweh. This was created by Israel. This was in-house. So the golden calf was not a pagan thing. It was not a heathen thing. It originated in Israel. It was concocted by Israelites. But what did they do? They took pagan elements in and they said, we're going to take these things we learned from our time in Egypt. Aaron clearly knew how to make molten gods, right? He was doing that in Egypt if we just think logically. So he took that with him and he said, we're going to use these pagan ways that we're used to, these traditions of ours, we're going to use them to worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh. That is unique to Israel. You can't say that's a pagan custom. Using a golden calf to worship Yahweh was never a pagan custom. That was engineered in Israel. That's in-house. So same thing with Christmas. Yeah, they took pagan elements and they brought them in to the worship of Yahweh, but they did it in a way that's unique. that wasn't done by the pagans. So it's full of paganism, but yet technically it's not pagan. This is even worse. This is even worse, because we're told not to mix the holy with the profane. Yahweh doesn't like this mixing. He doesn't like, warm water, lukewarm. He wants hot or cold, right? We would have been better off to just abandon the worship of Yahweh altogether and just go into paganism. Because then we wouldn't have the covenantal obligations to worship Yahweh under his terms. But because we collectively have insisted, we worship the God of the Bible. We worship the God of the Bible. We worship the God of the Bible. It's worse, because we have taken all these pagan elements and brought them in and said, we're worshiping the God of the Bible by doing all this fun pagan stuff. It's worse. So at this point in history, yeah, on a technicality, Christmas is not pagan. On a technicality, Easter is not pagan. But it's pagan. It's pagan. Why? Because Israel has mingled with the nations. We learn the way of the heathen, the pagans, the goy, the nations, the non-Israelite folks. We learn their ways, and we welcome them into the house with open arms. And now our religion is indistinguishable from old school paganism in a lot of ways. I've shared videos of pagan witches, heathen witches coming out and telling you, this is great. Christians are doing our stuff. I love it. They're right. They were doing this stuff, the pagans, the heathen, they were doing this stuff way before the Christians came around. We're on their turf. It's not like they're looking at the Christians and saying, wow, those Christians keeping Christmas and Easter, we want to do that. If those holidays are really all about Jesus, his birth and his death, burial, and resurrection, why on earth would pagans want to have anything to do with that? It's antithetical to their dogma. Why? But the inverse is the truth. Christianity took their stuff, brought it into camp, and said, this is ours. You can't sanctify what is unclean. You can't take something, unholy. Unholy doesn't mean evil, wicked, satanic, zombie, death, vampires, that's not what it means. It means not holy. Holy means set apart. If you're not set apart, you're common. You're like everybody else. Israel was supposed to be set apart, uncommon, not like all the nations around him. And what did we do? We said we want they have. We want what they have. Let's construct a complete sentence here, James. Let's try that. And it's wrong. Keeping Christmas is wrong. And I know that that's a direct, strong statement, because I know a lot of people that keep Christmas, and I love them to pieces. But we can't find any scriptural evidence that Yah's people should be keeping Christmas. We can't. We've got a whole slew of holy days that all through the Bible he tells us to keep. And we see evidence all through the New Testament of his people keeping them. And yet here we are. There's a meme that goes around. Christianity is doing every holiday, holy day under the sun except the ones in the Bible. It's not wrong. So anyway, something to consider. If you're in this Messianic Torah space, and you're considering going back to Christmas because technically it's not pagan, you're making a mistake. A big one. If you are in the mainstream, whatever denomination you are, Lutheran, Catholic, Baptist, whatever, and you're doing Christmas, it's wrong. Am I saying, and here's the other part, am I saying that a person that keeps Christmas, or keeps Easter, or any of these other things, am I saying that they are pagan? No. Now, there's probably a time early on when I would have said that, and I probably did. But as you learn, you grow. And as you grow, you mature. No Christian that I know, my parents, my brother, my friends, none of them are pagans. Now, are there pagan elements in the traditions they're keeping? Yes. But they're not pagans. So, for the Messianic Torah space going around calling Christians pagans, no. No, they're not. They're not. Pagans are pagans. Mainstream Christianity, for all of its warts and wrinkles, is functionally the house of Israel. Functionally, it's in the camp. Does it misstep? Yes. Are there glaring doctrinal deficiencies? Yes. I could say the same for Judaism. But, in theory, we're all worshiping the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And because of that, technically none of us are pagans. However, we're doing a whole ton of pagan stuff. Something to consider. I love y'all. I'm going to get ready for the trailer swap. Sabbath is coming up. Sabbath, by the way, is one of the things that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob specifically said, do this, and you will be set apart. This will be a sign between me and my people forever. It's not a sign between him and not his people forever. It's not a sign between him and the heathen or the pagans or the Gentiles. It's a sign between him and Israel. Forever. Forever. We see people in the New Testament keeping the Sabbath. We see Polycarp, approximately 160 A.D. This is after Christ. This is after Paul. He's a disciple of John. We see him keeping the Sabbath. Why? We even see him keeping Passover. Why? Because he heeded the words of Jeremiah 10, and he decided not to learn the ways of the heathen. He wanted these identifying markers of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob put on his forehead and on his hand. Deuteronomy 6. Love you guys. Yahweh bless.